Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. This is one that you guys have been asking for since it came out, but my typical policy is to allow at least a few days for the original content creator to get their views. I don't want to step on what they're trying to do because, first and foremost, what I do here is reaction. I think you guys know by now that I'm doing a lot more than just reacting. I'm trying to offer additional context, additional commentary, more depth than what can necessarily be brought in the original content. But we want to support our original content creators, and I think Epic History is one of the very best out there. So nothing I do is meant in any way, shape, or form to take away from what they're doing, but only to add to it. So with that in mind, I hope you've already watched this video. If you haven't, please make sure that you do. I'm also a very proud supporter of Epic History on Patreon. And as I mentioned the other day, now more than ever, Patreon's so important for your favorite content creators. And I don't just mean myself, I mean anybody. If you're able to do something to support your original content creators, please do, because with all the changes that are happening with YouTube and the focus on shorts, a lot of history content creators are really hurting right now in terms of the typical revenue that they have. And I know that a channel like Epic History probably has a lot of overhead in the high production quality of their videos. So I'm proud to support them. And I'm proud to thank Bessie in Androssen, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, in Alberta, Canada, for your support on Patreon. You are one of the reasons I'm able to keep doing this, so thank you so much for that. And I also want to let you know that we're doing the Battle of Verdun from Epic History. World War I, as you know, is one of kind of my bread and butter areas of history. I've been on, a 4-hour History Channel documentary about the Great War, so this is a topic I feel pretty confident in, and Verdun is a place I've been a few times now. And if you'd like to see the places we're going to talk about today, we're doing a Great War history tour at the end of October. The link is down in the description. You can read the entire itinerary, but we're spending a decent amount of time at Verdun. We're going to be going to Fort Douaumont. We're going to be going to Fort Vaux. We're going to go to the Douaumont ossuary and necropolis. We're going to Fleury, one of the villages that died for France, Mort pour la France. So we're going to see all of these places firsthand. We're going to see a bunch of other places as well. So if you've ever wanted to do that, this is a great opportunity. And if you have any questions about the tour, just shoot me an email and I'll answer those as quickly as I can. But let's go ahead and dive into this one.
Sponsored by War Thunder. The 21st of February, 1916. 1,000 German guns open fire on French positions around Verdun. These are the opening salvos of one of World War I's deadliest battles.
So when you look at the math on the number of shells that were fired in this opening bombardment to signal the start of the Verdun offensive by the Germans, and the area in which these shells fell, it's just a mind-boggling number. And the description that often gets used about artillery fire in World War I is drum fire or drum roll artillery. And you can't think of artillery as boom, boom, boom. It's more like indistinguishable. It's boom, 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 boom. I mean, it's just ridiculous. I mean, the psyche of these men to withstand the kind of artillery barrages. And if you look at photos of the areas, look at a photo of Passchendaele in 1917 outside of Ypres in Belgium. I mean, there's just nothing but craters. How anyone survived those is just impossible to understand.
Verdun, traditional military strategy, gives way to the grim logic of attrition. Kill the enemy faster than you lose your own men.
Right.
And you'll crush his will to fight.
This is a strategy that it's a mindset that slowly creeps in. Anytime you're dealing with war, especially war in the industrial age, what you deal with, it's true in the American Civil War, it's true in World War I, it's true in World War II, is initially the weapons are ahead of the tactics, and then the tactics have to adjust to the new weapons, and then when the tactics adjust, then the weapons change. And so there's this constant push and pull of developing new weapons and developing new tactics to fit what's happening on the battlefield. What World War I looks like in September of 1914 is completely different than what it looks like in February of 1916, which is completely different than what it looks like in November of 1917 or in the summer of 1918.
The theory will be tested to the limit. Verdun becomes a giant meat grinder, consuming 1,000 lives a day for 300 days. The battle...
And we're talking deaths there, right? Not just casualties, because you're talking over 1 million total casualties, which is killed, wounded, missing, all of that. Keep in mind, too, whenever you see all of these videos that show men charging across fields and attacking, you're often dealing with a mix of real footage, but primarily you're dealing with footage that are recreations that happened in the years after the war. We do have original real footage in some cases, but a lot of what you're seeing when you're actually seeing real battlefield footage is recreation.
Will be immortalized for its horror and the extraordinary suffering of troops on both sides. But it is also a dramatic tale of leadership, determination, and heroism against a backdrop of emerging technologies and evolving military doctrines.
So true.
This is the story of Verdun, 1916.
I love this, and I love how you're already seeing the terrain, because Verdun, like many battlefields, it's so important to go there to understand the terrain. And what you understand right away when you go to Verdun is the hills and the trees. It's a forested, hilly area. Think like if you've ever been to central Pennsylvania, somewhere like that, or Vermont, places where you have a lot of like rolling hills, decent size, a couple thousand feet high, nothing like giant mountains, and then all very covered in forests and things like that. But then over the backdrop of the city right on the Meuse River in the center, and then multiple forts that are built into the hills, and then trench lines that connect all of those. I should mention, too, they have such amazing music in all of these, but often, I don't know what service they use for their royalty-free music, but it's not any of the ones that I use. I have subscriptions to all of those. So occasionally I'll get like a notification of a copyright issue with one of the background musics that they use, and YouTube will erase that out. So if you notice during this video at any point that the sound seems muffled or a little strange, that's probably a place where YouTube has erased a song that I don't have a license for.
2 months earlier, Allied commanders meet at Chantilly, France, to discuss military plans for the year ahead. 1915 had been a bad year for the Allies. Russian forces in full retreat, disastrous landings at Gallipoli, and despite costly Allied offensives, the Germans still occupy Belgium and parts of France.
So there's this tiny sliver of Belgium that the Allies have held on to, and that in part happens at the end of the Race to the Sea, where you have the flooding of the Isar River in order to prevent the Germans from being able to take that last sliver of it, but they've taken most of it. You also have turnover happening among the leadership, right? So you had the stepping down of the initial German overall commander, Helmut von Moltke, and he's been replaced by Erich von Falkenhayn, who's much more aggressive and is going to be the kind of the father of this plan for Verdun, and it's going to ultimately lead to his downfall. On the Allied side, you've got Sir John French has been replaced by Douglas Haig. You have a lot of turnover happening with the French High Command.
The Western Front is now locked in trench warfare, in which attacking forces suffer massive casualties for every tiny advance. But Allied commanders at Chantilly believe the German army is now overstretched, and that 1916 is their chance for victory.
So the idea had always been that the Germans can't win a sustained two-front war. And the Germans understand that too. I think Falkenhayn understands that. He knows that long-term they can't win a war of attrition. They're just too much economic power. There's too much naval power on the Allied. When we say the Allies, we're talking about the Entente. What we would refer to as the Allies in the Second World War, which is the people fighting against Germany and its allies.
The Allies agreed to launch large-scale, simultaneous attacks from east, west, and south.
And you notice what's not in there, right, is Verdun, right? So the Allies have these plans for simultaneous attacks, which is really smart because the Germans don't have the manpower to fight on three fronts at the same time, withstanding these combined offensives. But the Somme offensive, which is supposed to be the British and the French together, gets thrown off because it's planned for the middle of 1916. It gets thrown off by Verdun
to deal a knockout blow to the Central Powers. It is exactly what German commander Erich von Falkenhayn fears. He is already convinced that a decisive German victory in the war is unlikely.
Right, so if he knows they can't win a decisive war anymore, what do? You sue for peace. You force one or more of the Allies out of the war, say the French, and then you level the playing field a little bit, or you give yourself an advantageous position from which to be able to negotiate a better terms.
Resources are too vast. Instead, he argues that Germany should try to force the enemy to negotiate, and do it soon. He believes this can be achieved by making the cost of war impossibly high for the Allies.
This is a common strategy. This is what the Americans do to win the American Revolution. This is what the Confederacy was hoping to do in the American Civil War. If you are up against a superior foe in terms of material and manpower, you have to find some other way to win.
And that the French will be first to crack. So he plans an offensive against the French, codenamed Operation Gericht.
Judgment.
The target, Verdun, in northeastern France. The historic fortress city lies in a valley of the River Meuse. In 1914, the Germans had crossed the river to the north.
So if you're an American, and you've probably heard the term Meuse-Argonne Offensive, which is the largest battle ever fought by the U.S. Army to this day, well, that basically stretches from the Meuse River on the east to the Argonne Forest in the west. It overlaps part of the western part of the Verdun battlefield.
And the city now lies in an exposed salient. But it is well protected.
I love this. I love this 3D view. It's so much better than looking at a map because you understand the elevation, which is such a vital part of understanding Verdun.
Verdun is surrounded by hills and ridges, reinforced by a ring of powerful forts, built to guard France's eastern frontier.
Think about the German plan to attack a place like this. There's a reason why this part hasn't been taken yet. But there's some reasons why the Germans can be optimistic about taking this. And one of them is that because it's so well fortified, because of the changing nature of warfare, the French have largely left a lot of these big forts like Fort Douaumont relatively undefended.
These are formidable defenses. But there is logic behind Falkenhayn's choice of target.
I just said that. That's funny.
Falkenhayn knows that Verdun holds immense symbolic importance for France. And their generals will feel forced to defend it, potentially to the last man. This is what he wants, because his real goal is not to capture Verdun, but to inflict so many losses on the French that he destroys their fighting spirit.
Now, there's some debate about this among historians, and I'm not sure we'll ever get a clear answer on it. The common notion that people apply to Verdun is that Falkenhayn said he wanted to bleed France white. There is a tactic that is developing at this point that is being used on both sides called bite and hold, which is instead of trying to make a massive breakthrough where you just, you do traditionally what gets done in war, which is you break through the line, you flank the enemy, you send your cavalry through and things like that. And they're still using cavalry at this point. Tanks are going to come about in the middle of 1916, but it's still primarily cavalry is kind of your main means of getting somewhere quickly. But Falkenhayn never really expresses this before or during the early stages of Verdun. It's in hindsight later on when he's writing about Verdun that he says that's what his plan was to bleed France white. So people debate whether that was the real strategy or if he just applied that afterwards because of how it all went down. But bite and hold is a real tactic, right? Instead of breaking through, you're going to take a little bit of territory, and then the enemy's going to try and take it back, and you're going to inflict heavy casualties on them in their counter-offensive because everybody's going by this cult of the offensive at this time, which is always better to attack. So you attack a little bit, you throw back the enemy counterattack, then you attack a little bit further, throw back the enemy counterattack, bite and hold, bite and hold. The Somme was meant to be that.
The phrase he repeatedly uses, according to one officer, is that the French army must be bled white.
Yep.
All the Germans have to do is capture the heights that surround Verdun. The French will be forced to counterattack, beginning a battle of attrition, in which the Germans hold the best cards. Artillery is the greatest killer on the Western Front, and is key to Falkenhayn's plans.
Yeah, I love that they just threw that in there because there's a common misconception that it's machine guns that kill. Artillery is the main killer on the Western Front, and it doesn't even have to be during an attack. A lot of the guys that I've done research into are killed where there's no attack going on. They're just in the trenches, and they called it wastage, which is a terrible term for human lives, but it's when there's no active operations happening and someone dies anyway. That's what they called it.
Significantly, Verdun is just 25 miles from Metz, a major German rail hub with rail links straight back to German factories.
Why does this matter? This is an industrial war, and we've done videos on the topic of supply. The amount of supplies that are needed to sustain a single division in the field, and you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of divisions on each side in these sectors, it's massive. And so you need trains. You need a lot of trains, or you need trucks in the case of the French with the Voie de Sacré, the Sacred Way, during Verdun. So taking a place like Metz would be massive, and it's going to be one of the targets in 1918 of the Allied offensive.
Ensuring his guns will get all the shells they need. In contrast, Verdun itself can no longer be safely supplied by rail due to the German advance, and has to rely on a constricted road network for supplies.
It's a single roadway, and they've got trucks running 24/7, and if one breaks down, they just push it off to the side because they can't stop to fix it. They need these supplies flowing.
Some historians claim that later, having seen the battle Verdun became, Falkenhayn lied about his plans in 1916. That in truth he had always hoped to capture Verdun. But after the war, he then chose to rewrite history.
Yeah, we'll never know.
Even faking a key report, to claim he had only ever planned a grand battle of attrition. Falkenhayn's exact objective will soon become a moot point. And either way, the plan is bold and ruthless. But for it to work, the Germans will have to seize and hold Verdun's famous forts.
And I tell you, Fort Douaumont is one of the most interesting places you'll ever visit, and we're going to go there on the tour. It's massive. It's mostly all underground. It's relatively well preserved and just incredible to visit.
Verdun is protected by 19 major French forts and around 20 smaller fortifications or ouvrage. Most were built in the 1880s, following France's defeat in the Franco-Prussian War. But they have been continuously modernized and strengthened since.
Yeah, you've got turrets, you've got massive guns, you've got earthen protection in addition to thick walls. These are pretty substantial forts.
Each fort is within sight of its neighbours, so their guns can offer supporting fire. The jewel in the crown is Fort Douaumont, which dominates the landscape and is reputed to be the most powerful fort in Europe.
Right, as long as it's manned and it has all its guns, neither of which are true during the Battle of Verdun.
It is a steel and concrete pentagon, 1/4 of a mile wide, and sits above a slope, or glacis, guarded with barbed wire and spiked railings.
Yeah, and it's got these massive ditches around it. They're not filled with water. They're not like a traditional moat, but you enter from back here. You can walk around up on top on the grass.
The center of the fort is protected by a dry moat, 5 meters deep, 10 meters wide. 3 galleries in the forward corners house light cannon and machine guns, which allow flanking fire across the outer glacis and into the moat. At the center, armored observation points and 5 elevated artillery and machine gun emplacements. These include the Casemate de Bourges, with 2 75mm guns.
It's an imposing fort when you view it, when you get a chance to visit for the first time. And it's just stunning to me that they basically leave it undefended.
And a rotating 155mm gun turret that can be lowered into the fort for protection.
Brilliantly designed.
Only a fraction of the fort is visible from the surface. Deep underground, below 13 feet of earth and 8 feet of steel-reinforced concrete, lie tunnels, facilities, and barracks for 800 soldiers across 2 subterranean levels. But all is not as it seems. In the opening stages of the war, Belgium's famous forts had been smashed by German heavy artillery. This had caused French generals to question the value of Verdun's forts.
Which was a huge mistake, and this is what I mean about how tactics inform future tactics and future technology. It all is an adjustment, it's all a response to what happened before. And this is a crucial error that is made by the French after they see what happens in places like Liège and Belgium. They're not the same. I mean, Fort Douaumont would have been okay under the heaviest of German artillery fire.
Plus, no one is expecting a major attack at Verdun. So, with urgent calls for artillery elsewhere on the front, Douaumont and other forts have been stripped of their heavy guns.
Yep. The only ones that are left are the ones that are mounted in the fort that are on like the turrets and stuff that can't really be easily moved.
By 1916, they are also pathetically undermanned. In 1914, Douaumont was held by 500 men. Now, by just 56 middle-aged reservists.
At one point, there was a young officer there named Charles de Gaulle, who was actually sitting. There's a memorial there to him from his time being stationed there.
The most powerful fort in Europe is a paper tiger.
Yep. And it's going to be taken by like one guy with a pistol.
German preparations for the attack progress rapidly. Artillery will pave the way for the infantry's advance. Engineers build 10 new railway lines, 24 stations and spur lines to
Think about the logistics here, but this is the nature of this war, and this is what's such a fascinating thing, is how much industry was involved in all of this. The rail lines, the amount of supplies, the amount of food you had to ship to the front. 1 million shells fired in the opening bombardment over a stretched area. Basically, you're talking about a less than 20-mile front that you're firing 1 million artillery shells into. And I think it's like 19 miles wide, 3 miles deep. You're talking about roughly 18,000 artillery shells per square mile for each square mile of the front, just during the opening bombardment, which gets heard 100 miles away.
Transport heavy guns into position. They assemble a terrifying arsenal, 1,220 guns for an attack on an 8-mile front. An average of 1 gun every 12 yards. 1,300 munitions trains delivered 2.5 million shells for the initial bombardment.
And this, think about what's going on back home to be able to provide. This is one tiny sector of one front. This is the Western Front. Then you have the Italian Front, and you have the Eastern Front, and you have fighting going on in other places in the world. Think about the logistics of what needs to be produced back home for all of this, all while Germany's under a naval blockade.
Finally, 140,000 soldiers move up for the assault. Verdun is the first major battle in history to begin with a struggle for air superiority. The Germans deploy 168 aircraft to dominate the skies and prevent French aircraft from observing their build-up. But there are some ominous signs. The French notice that the Germans are demolishing church steeples behind their own line, something they do before a major attack, so enemy spotters can't use them as reference points. But reports like these, and urgent requests for reinforcements, are ignored.
So one of the heroes for France in the early stages of the Battle of Verdun is a guy named Colonel Douaumont, who's in charge of chasseurs, which are light infantry. He had been a member of parliament in France. He have had a lot of influence, and he's on the front lines for this. And up in the area, not too far from Douaumont in that area, Colonel Douaumont going to be on the front lines of the initial attack, and he's warning, he's pleading with high command that something's going down, and he's not being listened to, and he's going to be killed in the initial stages of the fighting. And you go there to this day, you'll find his grave right there on the battlefield. His command post is a really, really cool site to visit on the Verdun battlefield.
On the eve of battle, the French are badly outnumbered and outgunned. At 7:15 a.m. on the 21st of February, more than 1,000 German guns open fire on French positions around Verdun. They fire almost 1 million shells that day. The Germans call such bombardments Trommelfeuer, drum fire.
Yep.
Because the continuous explosions sound like a drum roll.
Yeah, just you have to think of it that way, like almost indistinguishable. There are descriptions of things like an artillery shell hitting and blowing something in the air, but before it can come back to the ground, the next shell hits and keeps it in the air. I mean, that's the kind of thing you're experiencing here. It's just unimaginable.
At 5 p.m., the barrage lifts, and German infantry advance. They find many French trenches abandoned, or occupied only by crazed, shell-shocked survivors.
As would any of us be. I mean, if you withstood that, how do you not go insane? How do you not completely lose your mind under that for even just a few hours?
Yet there are pockets of resistance. As dusk falls, isolated French regiments mount a desperate defense from the shattered woods of Caen and Douaumont.
So Caen, that's where we're talking about Colonel Douaumont that I mentioned earlier.
While French artillery harasses German infantry advancing across open ground. But they cannot hold the enemy for long. 4 days later, on the 25th of February, the Germans reach Fort Douaumont. A small detachment of soldiers approaches cautiously, but to their astonishment, they find it almost abandoned.
A small detachment, not a massive infantry assault. A squad of guys walks in and just like, hey, all right, now we took the fort.
They slip in through an opening, and the famed Fort Douaumont falls without a shot fired. Its loss, a French officer remarks, will cost the French army 100,000 lives.
So you had these American airmen serving with the French. They had what was called the Lafayette Escadrille, which is a unit that they had like a Native American head and headdress that was painted on the side, and Lafayette being a Frenchman who served with distinction in the American army during the Revolution. So this is like the Americans returning the favor, and it was very much viewed that way. When the U.S. enters the war in 1917, there's this parade that happens in Paris, and they march to Lafayette's grave in the outskirts of Paris, and this colonel gives a speech that ends with the words, and basically he says, it would be ingratitude for America to forget the debt that is owed, that we owe to the French because of their help in support and in manpower during the Revolution. And so here we are to return the favor, and what we have of blood and treasure is yours, France. And then he ends with Lafayette, we are here. So there's a lot of that kind of kinship that exists between the Americans and the French during this war.
The Germans are now just 6 miles from Verdun. Only a weaker line of forts, Souville, Saint-Michel, and Belleville, stand in their way. France's high command has been caught napping, and at first, Commander-in-Chief General Joffre is reluctant to act.
Send
He
Pétain!
wants nothing to disrupt plans for the major Allied assault that summer. But
So the reason that the assault's going to happen at the Somme is that's where the French and British sectors come together, is at the Somme. It's really not the ideal place to attack. The Germans are well dug in there. The British actually want to launch an attack up further around Ypres, where they have their main lines. But what ends up happening is it becomes, instead of a joint British-French assault, it's going to become primarily British with a little bit of French support on their right flank.
soon persuaded that Verdun's loss would be an unacceptable blow to French morale, as well as a political disaster. He orders the entire Second Army, under General Philippe Pétain, to reinforce Verdun.
So this is the same Philippe Pétain which during World War II is going to be viewed as a traitor, because he's going to be the main driving force behind the French capitulating to the Germans and setting up a collaboration government. He's actually going to be arrested and sentenced to death for treason, but because he's so old, they don't execute him.
6 days after the German attack, Pétain is in overall command of the sector. He immediately suspends costly counterattacks to prioritize defense. And by the end of February, the French line has been shored up. One help is that the Germans have advanced beyond range of their own supporting artillery, guns that are nightmarishly hard to haul forward through the thick mud.
Right.
The German advance stalls. Crucially, Falkenhayn has failed to capture all the heights on the east bank of the Meuse. This means German lines are exposed to artillery fire from Bois-Bourrousse, Mars, and Vacheauville.
So what you're looking at, if you're looking at this map, then what do you think the best plan of action is for the Germans? Well, it's attack on your own right flank right here. So this would be the eastern part of the German line around Verdun, because we're looking at the map upside down right now. We're actually, like, south would be up on this map. So you attack over here in what will later be the Meuse-Argonne battlefield, places like the Mort Homme, the Dead Man Hill.
The French guns on high ground west of the Meuse.
Did I say east? Yeah, it'd be the west. It'd be the right flank of the Germans.
German planners had urged Falkenhayn to attack these positions from the start. Finally, on the 6th of March, long after the element of surprise has been lost, he extends his offensive to the west bank.
Hill 304?
After a devastating artillery bombardment, 2 divisions, more than 30,000 men, attack on a 3-mile front. They suffer heavy losses and are unable to take 2 key positions that will become infamous, Côte 304 and Le Mort Homme.
Yeah, so this is Hill 304 and the Dead Man, or you could call it just Dead Man's Hill. Iconic parts of the battlefield. And yeah, it's much more flat. It's not the same giant hills, rolling hills. You don't have the big forts up there.
At the end of March, 2 more German attacks are bloodily repulsed, around Douaumont village and the Bois de la Cayette. The battle already seems to be taking on a life of its own, sucking in more and more troops.
Yeah, by the time the 300 days of the Battle of Verdun is over, pretty much every member of the French army has served at least part of their time in Verdun. If you go to the Douaumont ossuary, you'll see all of the regiments that fought there, and it's basically all of them, because they rotated them, which was really smart. You know, you don't want guys fighting in that meat grinder for 300 straight days, and so they would rotate fresh units in and then move other units to other parts of the front.
The original objectives blurred, as every village and high point becomes a ferociously contested prize. Falkenhayn is later criticized for 2 key mistakes in this opening phase of the battle. Not attacking on the west bank of the Meuse from the outset, and not committing his reserves soon enough to exploit his early breakthrough. Now those opportunities have passed. There will be no more easy gains for the Germans. And a familiar pattern emerges, as Verdun turns into a terrible, grinding battle of attrition, as deadly for the Germans as for the French.
Okay, that was fantastic. They really only covered the early stages of Verdun, so I'm wondering if we're going to get a part 2 to that. I think that would be fantastic as well. So hopefully we will. If you want to visit Verdun, or if you're just the slightest bit interested in any part of the Western Front, and you want to just look at the itinerary and look at the info about our group tour, we've still got a bunch of spots available for that. We need to try and hit a minimum of 20 in order to make this trip a go. So we need at least 6 more bookings in the next month or so. So link is in the description to check that out. I want to thank Tom in Cranberry Township, Pennsylvania, not far from me, and Juno in Auburn, Alabama. Thank you both so much for your support on Patreon. Definitely go out and check out all the great content over on Epic History. Thanks for watching.